would like to start with acknowledging our gratitude to all the lands that we are gathering on, to the First Nations people on whose lands we gather on today. And I know we're all in different places. I personally would like to acknowledge that I am living and working on the unceded territory of the Kwanlin, Katzie, Matsqui, and Semiahmoo First Nations. This picture is from one of my walks out on our land, and I must say that I have been connecting with land a whole lot more and finding new places in my own beautiful neighborhood as I've been home more. And yes, so very, very grateful for the beauty in our province. And I will hand to Michelle to acknowledge where she is, and also acknowledge the fact that you are all doing the same thing in the territories that you're on. Go for it, Michelle.
Hi everyone, I'm joining from North Vancouver on the ancestral, traditional, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations.
Thank you, Michelle. Your turn.
Sorry, okay. Hi everyone, welcome to our, I think this is our third webinar from the BC School Centered Mental Health Coalition. My name is Michelle Champrone. I'm a senior project manager with the BC Children's Hospital Mental Health Literacy and Health Promotion team. I also do a lot of work in collaboration with Foundry, and I'm on the steering committee for the coalition. I think many of you may be familiar with the work of the coalition, but for those of you who don't know who we are, I'll just give a brief intro. We are a network of a very diverse group of organizations and individuals who have come together for a number of years now around the topic of mental health in the school setting, and supporting schools from the lens of school connectedness and using a whole school approach to mental health promotion in the school setting. It occurred to me, and many of you might remember this, but it occurred to me that this week is the 10th year, 10 years ago this week was when we did our first annual Summer Institute. And the Summer Institute was a professional development event, kind of a flagship event for the coalition that we hosted for a number of years. And I know some of you have participated in those, have spoken at those, and I think the very, very first group that came together to form the coalition came together around that event. So I thought it was an interesting time. It's something we did it was always this time of year at the end of August. So it's a nice, I think we can officially say the coalition is 10 years old. And we've continued to meet. Typically we meet in person. That's been our model, several meetings a year in person. Now, like everyone else, we are adjusting to the virtual world. And one of the things that we have been doing most recently is now having webinars and helping to support sort of the same messages and the same themes and topics that the coalition has always come together around, and doing this in webinar format. So we're really happy that so many of you are here to join us for this one. Do you want me to do that part too, Gail?
Yep, this is you.
Okay.
Next to this one and the next one.
Sounds good. So that was the background on a little bit on the coalition, and just a few little housekeeping things. I think everyone is well into the webinar virtual world now, but we invite you for this one to keep your camera on if you can, so that we can try to connect via, see everyone's faces. Of course, if you need to, you can turn it off. Reminder to stay muted when you're not speaking, and you can use the chat feature. That's one of my favorite things about the new virtual world, how quickly we can share resources and information, so feel free to use the chat feature. I know someone already has. And as was mentioned, this will be recorded.
Oops. Michelle, are you doing this one?
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Yes, so Gail's going to introduce our speakers in just a moment, but the format for this webinar is going to be 3 short presentations and an opportunity for some reflection. And then we are able to work in some small group discussions, which will be really nice, and then come back together as a group for a larger discussion and a closing.
All right, so I get to introduce our presenters. And I won't read you their names and their titles, because you can do that yourself. If I did their bios, I could be here for way too long, and you would be, but I will tell you, you would be hugely impressed. But definitely one of the things that is important for me in introducing our presenters today is that they are embedded and living this work around compassionate systems leadership, and which is just so exciting and just such a really great way to introduce this topic to and spread it around our province and around even further than that. So that's kind of exciting. And I also really love that they are embedded in the practice for themselves. And although in some ways, you know, master practitioner experts in this area, but also very much works in progress as well, which I love. That sort of down to earth, you know, hey, I'm doing it too, and working through it. So I will stop there, and you will get to know them even more with their presentation. And yeah, I will be moving their slides, so I will not be perfect at that, but I will do my very, very best. And I'm really excited to share them and their work with you.
Right, so I'm going to start off, and then Joanne will take over from me, and then Dave will round out the series of mini presentations so that we can bring you both a framework for the work that we've been doing, a little bit of a conceptual grounding, and then also a personal experience, and Dave putting this into practice in his own work in schools. So one of the things that we've been doing as a group of practitioners is reminding ourselves that whenever we get together to learn together, to be together, it's important to ground ourselves before we start. And just today, just briefly, just that idea that we want to move from getting here, whatever we've been doing this morning, to actually being in this Zoom space together. And focusing, really invite you, if you've got your phone beside you, to turn it off, your email off, so you don't get those messages pinging across your screen at the top. And just take a moment to consider that we're here, what a gift it is to be able to gather. Thank you to the Coalition for making all of this possible. And setting a slight intention for yourself around something that you came here for. Maybe it was something you wanted to learn. Maybe it's something that you want to share with others, even an intention about how you want to show up. So just a quiet moment for a second, just to ground ourselves before we get going. Okay. So in 2018, HELP was approached by the Ministry of Education with a question. And the question is up on the screen for you. How collectively can we lead an education system that promotes mental health and well-being? This was pre-COVID, and so the focus was a broad focus really on the idea of Tier 1 services, a universal approach to building an education system that supported everyone in it, and co-created learning spaces for everyone that fostered positive mental health. We're now in a time, next slide, Gail. We're now in a time of COVID. And in some ways the question has changed, but in many ways it's the same question. It's a question of how we now lead collectively into a slightly different education system, or maybe a fundamentally different education system, where in many ways maybe it's even more important that we think about how we, across the board, foster the mental health and well-being of everyone within the system. So I'm going to speak about the work that we did to answer the first question, but we're going to be placing it in the context this question, which is really the COVID question, as we really all start thinking about heading back to school. Next slide, Gail. How's it going at that end?
Are you wanting this one with the meta-analysis?
Could you go to the two bubbles? Oh, I see. Okay, I know what you're doing. Good. Okay, can you go back one slide?
Okay, yeah.
That's lovely. Thank you so much. Yeah, back one. One more. Okay, good. So when we were thinking about this report, what we felt was important was actually to really ground ourselves in what we meant by fostering the development of mental health. Like, what is mental health promotion? What does that mean to us? And the definition we used was supporting individual resilience, creating supportive environments, and addressing the influence of the broader determinants of mental health. And we also felt the need to really define what we meant by positive mental health. And sort of highlighting here is that it's for all of us to feel, think, and act in ways that enhance our ability to enjoy life and deal with the challenges we face. In the context of the education system, that's really about the people within those educational spaces, in most cases schools, but not always, that really foster the well-being of everyone to be the best they can be, both in the context of learning, but also in the context of personal well-being. Next slide, Gail. The next question was, well, why are we suggesting that positive mental health and promoting mental health and well-being is important? And what we know from the science, this slide really documents a meta-analysis that was done by CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. What we know from the science is that, that when we foster environments and programs that nurture mental health and well-being, we do see an increase in social and emotional competence and positive attitude. Next click, Gail. What's more important is that for children, we also see an increase, back one, in academic achievement, while also seeing, I don't know, there's something weird going on with that. We also see an improvement in academic learning achievement, children doing better across the board, both socially and emotionally. There's something weird going on with those slides.
Pippa, do you want me to stop sharing and you share?
No, you're totally great. No, you're totally great. What's important here is that not only are we talking about children increasing improved and positive attitude and improved learning, but also what we're talking about here when we think about improving environments is the well-being of everyone in that space, because it's the right thing to do, and it's actually a human right that we support teachers and academics, and teachers and administrators to experience the same thing. So when we started embarking on this study, we believed that what was really important was to actually engage everyone that we felt could provide perspective on this issue in the process. And you'll see on this slide that we did a wide range of information gathering. We ran conferences, we did interviews, we had discussion and focus groups, and we really did try and cover the ground in terms of the people who work in this space of mental health in schools, mental health, well-being in general. So educational leaders, but also a wide range of other people. And I will sort of say a huge thank you to members of this coalition also for being centrally involved in providing perspective in the report. We produced a report called Fragmentation to Alignment. It's available for you to go and read. I think it ended up being something like 60 pages with lots of deep appendices around what was in it. And I'm not going to go into a huge amount of depth in every component, but I do want to really just hold on to some of the key findings. One of the things that we did in the report was try to pull together what we called a coherent provincial framework. That would provide an overview that showed how all of the pieces fitted together. And we were really working with the three primary focuses of the ministry at the time: social emotional learning, mental health literacy, and trauma-informed practice. And what we tried to do is build a model to show how all of these things fit together. So in the middle, you see there, we felt really strongly, and we heard from everyone we spoke to, that they wanted to see some kind of strategy that actually allowed us to support children all the way from the early years to emerging adulthood and graduation from school. There was strong feedback that we needed to embed it in Indigenous perspectives. The First Peoples principles of learning were foundational, people felt, and that actually in many ways contained everything that we were talking about when we were talking about building learning spaces that support the mental health and well-being of everyone. We also talked a lot about the importance of building adult attitudes, knowledge, competence. So not just focusing on school and children and developing programs to support children, but also thinking a lot about how we support adults in the system to be well. And I know that this coalition and a range of other people around the province have really been working on that idea of adult wellness as a foundation for this strategy as well. And finally, another foundation was the BC curriculum, that as we move into increasingly implementing the renewed curriculum, which includes social and emotional competency, personal and social competency, that we really use that as a foundation for strategies across the school system. If you move up the diagram, sort of looking at that curvy bit at the top, building the knowledge and skills and relationships of children, youth, and adults was held here as a relationship that, a focus that was absolutely essential. And then noticing that also when we think about two key strategies, social emotional learning strategies that many school districts have picked up already, mental health literacy, which I noticed Wendy Carr is here. Wendy has been playing a really strong leadership role around the importance of this, especially as children age through the system, that we needed to see an integration of social emotional learning, mental health literacy with a lens of trauma-informed practice, rather than seeing these as different areas of programming. These are integrated. We see a different level of influence depending on the age of the children that we're dealing with, but they need to be interconnected seamlessly across elementary, middle, and secondary schools. We heard a lot about the importance of involving parents and caregivers in the process. Children are at school for a portion of their day, but especially in light of COVID, where a lot of children are spending time learning at home with parents, engaging parents also in the process of thinking about how we build environments which are safe and caring and support learning and growth for everyone within them. And finally, and this was something that we really worked on hard with the coalition as we were building the report, the idea that so much that happens in schools is actually delivered in partnership with a range of other organizations and institutions, and that they play a critical role both in the universal delivery of health promotion, positive mental health services, but also in the idea that there are some children who particularly need some additional care. In some cases, we'd call that tier 2 or tier 3 type intensive services or crisis management, but the importance of this as a partnered process. So this was the framework that we put into the report. And before I hand to Joanne, I just want to double click on a couple of really important lessons that we underlined within the report, and why we felt that it was important to not only take this framework, but connect it with the importance of compassionate systems leadership. The first is that we noted that any innovation or approach to address the idea of a universal strategy to support well-being and positive mental health needed to reach multiple audiences and at multiple levels. And when I say that, what we really felt was that if we acknowledge the complexity of this, it really helps us think differently about the kinds of strategies that we're going to use. So leading with a focus on positive mental health is complex. And if we want to do this, we have to be thinking at multiple layers and with multiple sectors. The other thing that came across strongly in the report is this idea that if you want to do things differently, you have to see things differently and look at the world differently. So within the report, we talk quite a lot about the importance of systems leadership. And this is the slide where I'm going to hand over to Joanne, but I'm just going to segue over to her with a few key lessons that sat in this bucket. We heard really strongly from people that if we're going to do this complex work well across systems and at many layers, we need to engage ourselves personally, fully, our passion, our humanity, and our personal mastery of how we come into the world to work with other people. We need to nurture excellent communication and collaborative skills that can ground reflective and transformative conversations. And we also need, as leaders, to think differently and use new systems thinking tools to help us understand, dig into, and understand the kinds of issues that we're dealing with so that we can really come up with new solutions that we may not have thought about before. So I'm going to hand over at this stage to Joanne. Joanne's actually going to really dig into compassionate systems leadership as a discipline.
Thanks, Pippa. Hi, everybody. Before I get into this, I really want to acknowledge all of you. We are in a time, and the stresses and challenges of this time are, unprecedented, I think, in my lifetime, and I'm probably lots older than most of you. So I just want to give my gratitude and love to each of you as you move forward in this time, because it's a tough one. So thank you all for being here and being committed to paving a bit of a new path with all of this. So a couple of points I want to make specifically about compassionate systems leadership, and Pippa alluded to the first one a little bit, is it really does provide a foundation for creating change in the way the system is working, and it's particularly applicable in challenges that are as complex as the one that we're facing in the education system. One of the things that I love about compassionate systems leadership, it is that forward-thinking systemic approach. So, again, as we talked a bit about earlier, there's been a lot of work done in BC to really build on the well-being of adults and students in the system. But sometimes if you're not thinking and acting systemically, building that well-being in and of itself doesn't progress the initiative in the way that you would hope. Because you're going back to a whole bunch of structures and processes that may not be that helpful to continue to perpetuate that well-being. It is an integrated framework for the development of capabilities, and it's really designed for individuals and collectives that are already engaged in thinking about how they can create systemic change. It builds capacity in those three core domains, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. Just one more point that I'll need the slide for Gail to go back to, and it's an important one. We talk about compassionate systems leadership. Our assumption in this work is that everyone, no matter what your position, is a leader, and everyone has the potential to create or support change. So I distinguish very much between managers and leaders. We hope that all managers are leaders, but not all leaders are managers. And so this is something that we can all really contribute to. Okay, I'm ready, Gail. This is just really, I want to emphasize that we haven't come to this as sort of an idea that this is the next big thing, and there's a joke, I suppose, about leadership books, and that, well, we're having this webinar of an hour and a half, there'll be 15 new books published on leadership, and it's probably not that far off. And really the thing I love about this approach is that it really can be integrated into multiple contexts, and it's really designed to build on what you're doing and who you are. I think of compassionate systems leadership much more as a way of being rather than a program or something that's rigid. And I'll talk a little bit more about how I think it can be woven into those contexts. I think, I can't remember when it was, I want to say it was maybe just pre-COVID, I don't know, but I had a chance to talk with your group once before about some of these things, give a brief presentation. So some of this may be something that you've heard of before, but as Pippa said, we're really talking about building capacity, offering tools and practices in those three interconnected domains of development. So a whole bunch of things around our own personal mastery, then our interpersonal capacity, how we work with each other, and very importantly, how we see and how we engage with the system around us. Within the personal mastery domain, the tools and practices really fall within these three areas, really providing ideas, mechanisms around self-reflection, whether that's journaling or contemplative practice, all kinds of ways that we bring more of a self-reflection mirror to our practice, building our capacity for mindfulness across settings, and then all building from a foundation of compassion, compassion for ourselves, compassion for each other, and compassion for the world that we all know needs it more than ever. It's really an important thing within this approach, this whole idea that the success of an intervention depends on the interior condition of the intervener. So if we as educators or principals or caregivers decide we're going to take a new approach to something, the impact of that approach is really about how we show up, who we are. And if there's one thing that I can get across about the concept of compassionate systems leadership, it really is about how we show up in that system, whether that system's a school, a district, a school bus, how we show up every day, and we are the system, and together there are opportunities for us to create change. Lots of stuff around how we get along with each other, skills to build more generative conversations, mindful communication. One of my favorite tools in the compassionate systems leadership bag is around building shared vision and journey. So there's much to be said about the alignment between our own individually and collectively held passions, visions, and how we are in our system. If we can have that alignment where we feel like every day we're going to work and it's actually an extension of what we believe in, it certainly makes us feel better, but it also helps us to progress change. Check-ins, I think, is one of the most important tools. And that really is just taking time when we get together to authentically check in with each other, find out how we're doing, find out what's moving in us in terms of what we might be fearful of, what might we be hopeful for, all of those kinds of things. I share very briefly that the check-ins in particular, I think we have borrowed from and built on from our Indigenous cultures in BC and other places. And I have to acknowledge that and I know for some First Nations people that I've spoken to about this, it's been challenging over the years when we as the dominant white culture haven't entirely respected people coming to the table and wanting to take some time to talk to each other. And they've persevered through that and at times been disrespected for it. And I really honor that, and I've learned so much from it. Next one. Systems thinking. So this is really the cognitive part, I guess, of compassionate systems leadership in many ways, really bringing in an understanding of systems behavior, archetypes, really allowing people to step back and take perspective, understand how differing perspectives contribute to the system, doing some mapping, doing iceberg exercises, which are really about looking at the problem and then getting underneath the surface of the problem to find out really what's driving it. So just, this might be my last slide. I want to say a few things about why I really think compassionate systems leadership is something that can contribute to the efficacy of how we're returning to school and promoting the positive mental health and well-being of us all. One of the things is it just creates space for the range of emotions and uncertainties. I don't think any of us really knows what to expect as we go back to this. And so in compassionate systems, if you're just creating that space, you're able to emerge what's going on. And an interesting story that a colleague of David and mine, who is in Denmark, and they went back to school quite a while ago. They were one of the first countries to do so. And he said, you know, we were so well prepared to make sure we checked every day with the kids about their anxiety. And we had all these exercises to do about the kids and their anxiety. And he said, I did it for the first couple of weeks, and they just kept on saying how much fun they were having. And so eventually I had to let it go and say, okay, I probably don't need to do that anymore. And it's just, so in compassionate systems leadership, it just holds the space for whatever happens, whether it's sadness or joy or uncertainty. Lots of tools and practices that can be adapted in multiple contexts, so it can be used with each other. Compassionate systems can be used in the classroom with children. The check-in practice has been very effective in classrooms around the world. You can use some or all of the tools or practices. As I say, you don't have to use them together. It really allows you to build on what you're comfortable with and what you know is going to work. Provides a systemic perspective and analysis. And the key thing with that for me is it allows you to slow down and step back and to really think about what's going on systemically. Compassionate systems leadership is built on a foundation of compassion for ourselves and others. And I think we all know that that is a critical foundation in this time. This disruption is really providing us a positive permission to do things differently. It really is giving us this little window of an opportunity to try out some different things that we may have wanted to try out before, but the permission is there now in a way that I don't think it's been there before. And with that, I feel quite hopeful at times that we'll be able to build an effective path back to school that will have more of a focus on promoting the mental health and well-being of kids, adults, parents, everybody. Thank you. Over to my dear friend, David DeRosa.
Well, thank you, Joanne. As thumbs up, everybody can hear me. Okay, great. Joanne touched on the unprecedented nature of our current experiences and the experiences that we're all sharing. And I would just like to continue a bit of that dialogue and maybe just, I guess, be a bit vulnerable and share with you as an audience of, I made the mistake of scrolling through the chat box, who's on the call, and there's some amazing expertise in there. So suddenly I'm a little nervous, which is awesome. If you could go to the next slide, Gail. I would like to acknowledge that today I'm working on the traditional lands of the Tunaxa, the Okanagan, and the Sinixt peoples. And in many ways, I've in terms of this journey I've been on, I've returned home. And so I have to thank Joanne for that image. She sort of placed it as a holder in one of the slides, and I left it there because home for me is Rossland, BC. I grew up there, Rossland Trail, but I lived in Rossland, and I started teaching biology in Rossland, and I could see the ski hill from my classroom. And kids knew that if they were going to skip out on a 10 centimeter day, that they couldn't ski the north face or the south facing slopes because I could see them, and I would be sad. Can we go to the next slide? So today, what I thought I would do is, as my friend and mentor Mark Edwards would say, it's important for me to clarify within myself my intention for today. So my intention is to just share with you how my compassionate systems leadership journey is impacting me and my sensing, thinking, and preparations in many ways as a new principal. Contextually, I've spent the last 2 years in a provincial role with our provincial association, the BC Principals and Vice Principals Association. And this fall, I'm returning to a new school, a new staff, a new but familiar community, and I'm doing all of that in a global pandemic. So how I arrived here and that profound shift in my personal and professional practice and maybe the capacities that I now have would be the intention of a follow-up webinar. You know, I think Joanne did a fabulous job of outlining there's a significant number of tools and skills and practices to develop. My intention today is just to do a quick and brief sort of outline of how I'm continuing on this journey and developing my skill and practice. Thank you. So what I'd like to do is provide the insight into the three main components of compassionate systems leadership from the context of a principle. Peter Senge would say that he would talk about Leith as the Indo-European origin for the word leadership, and Joanne already addressed that. Leaders are everywhere. We all have the capacity to lead, and so I'm sort of in this dual role of positional leader, where I do have some very specific guidelines and responsibilities, but also recognizing that creating space for others to step across their threshold and engage in their leadership, whether they're students, parents, people in the community, or teaching and support staff, that's a big part of my role as a leader. So just jumping into the next slide and personal mastery. For me, the first step toward personal mastery started with a very simple question, and it was, how am I arriving? And in sort of, I'll refer to like today's Dave and old Dave. Old Dave would ignore this question for a lot of reasons. Some, I'm sure, you know, many of you can appreciate it. You know, it's easier to focus on the needs of others. You know, that's sort of a big part of the work that I've always done. And in many ways, it's very important to focus on the needs of others. That's a bit of that manager leader role. You know, but I barely had time in a day to breathe. So, you know, how do I find a minute for myself? That was sort of that rationalization. Today, Dave, as I'm planning for the start of this, you know, challenging and unprecedented year, I'm very aware of the uncertainties, not what they are, but an awareness of unknowns. And it's a long list. And the unknown, sort of in air quotes, I think is what seems to create the most anxiousness or worry in me. And so if that's happening in me, and I'm a bit of a type A, you know, I would want all the answers to all the unknowns. And what we know in this current time, we're transitioning day to day, and we're learning more. Like experts in epidemiology and biology and microbiology are learning as they go. And so as a leader, you know, I could never even dream of knowing all the answers, and they might not be sustainable for me. So today, my first step is to practice finding the feeling of anxiousness that is related to my unknowns and sitting with it. And that's really hard, and that takes time, and that takes practice. And it's been a year-long journey that I'm now comfortable with that uncomfortableness. So I ask myself the question, how am I arriving? What am I missing? I find that space and I breathe with it. And this awareness of the level of a contractedness within me and what I'm experiencing is a very new skill. It's taken, and it does take practice, and it's as close to daily as I can get it, and some days many times a day. But now I'm able to hold a space for my own emotions. And more importantly, I think I can hold space for the emotions of others who are also feeling challenged by their unknowns and their uncertainty. And by starting with that question, how am I arriving? I'm a much better listener. I'm a much better supporter. And therefore, I believe I'm a better leader than I was when I started on this journey. So that's personal mastery. If we could go to the next slide. Joanne mentioned the check-in as one of the sort of tools or processes for the interpersonal piece. And really, I think somebody asked me in one of our cohort conversations, David, what are you going to do? New school, new staff, all this stuff. I said, check-in. It's such a powerful opportunity to create time and space for others. It's a regular reminder for me that, often we find the answers to the questions in our minds, and we find those answers within our hearts. And so what I need is the space to explore and listen to my heart. And that requires a space to be vulnerable. And so the compassionate systems check-in and the processes that I've experienced allow me to do that. And it's just the first time I engaged in a check-in with others, I was super nervous who am I to do this with other people? And as it turns out, we're all human, and the opportunity to be listened to is a really critical part of our humanity. And so, the opportunity to connect with ourselves through reflection, and then an invitation to connect with each other through listening, that's been just a really powerful part of my journey. So initially, I actually worried about the lost time associated with a check-in in a meeting, but there it is again. We are creating a much more impactful experience, and the outcomes by taking that time are so much richer and more meaningful for the people involved. So that's a check-in. And systems thinking, this is where there's a fair bit of work involved in going through these tools associated with developing a systems awareness, systems thinking capacity. But what I've found is in the context of all of our collective ongoing experiences, and this pandemic continues to shine a light on how connected we are and how complex the connections can be. In my role, maybe in the past, I would pull pieces apart from complicated situations and scenarios and try to find a quick fix and put those pieces back in. I now understand that's a quick fix, and it's just not sustainable typically. So there are a number of powerful systems thinking tools, a significant number, and it does take a bit of time, and there's some studying into looking at how they would work in our different contexts. But as I plan and prepare, I now find myself asking myself, what am I not seeing, or what data am I missing? And then I look for the tools to shine a light on a solution versus jumping to a quick fix. And if we could go to the next slide, Gail, the one tool that comes to mind for me that really resonated with me early, and it's in my back pocket all the time, is the ladder of inference. And I'm not going to blame my Italian passionate ancestry, but maybe it played a bit of a role. But in terms of jumping to a solution, maybe a bit too quickly. But the skill and ability to quickly analyze and act on that analysis, it really served me well. And in many of my circumstances, it's been necessary. But my years of experience have also helped me see, a situation move to a plan of attack in seconds. I now know that maybe I always knew, but now I have a much better awareness that the resulting action may actually be slightly flawed, based on the bias of my experience and the beliefs that I've developed over time. The ladder of inference is a tool that is now in my subconscious, my conscious. And in emergency situations, we know that, there's training needs to kick in. And there are circumstances where we need a quick response, and that may be necessary. We're all very familiar with that. What I'm talking about is the planning for the training and identifying resources and identifying how people are going to engage in that process. That's leadership. And the reason I say that is managing is a quick checklist to get us through something. Leadership is to taking into consideration how others are arriving. And the best way to do that is to ask myself that question: how am I arriving? And sensing into that allows me to create the space for other people to participate in the development or the co-development of the solution. And so the time to reflect on the impact of my assumptions and beliefs, that's literally what I am choosing to build in my pathway to action. I need to have that awareness. And so as a leader, my hope for these three sort of quick examples was to share with you that a significant part of my leadership for others is I have to start with myself. How am I arriving? Am I creating space for others? And am I sensing into a larger system in my day-to-day and my week-to-week? And I hope that's helpful. I hope more than anything, it's a bit of a catalyst to maybe dive deeper into these three aspects of the core components of compassionate systems leadership. And thank you.
Thank you, David. I can see you out on the slopes already. I want to do just a bit of a time check, Gail and or Michelle, in terms of, I think that we're going to come back together, and I'll explain what we're going to do. We're going to come back together about 10 after 1. Yeah, okay. So what we're going to do over the next about 20 minutes is firstly, just take a few minutes to check in with yourself. As you listened to Pippa and David and myself, what emerged for you? Not just what you thought, but what you felt in terms of the content around compassionate systems leadership. What were some of the things that just emerged in your mind and in your body about how that might fit in your context, or questions you might have, that sort of thing? So take a couple of minutes in just silent reflection, and then we'll take about 3 minutes to just write in your journal, just some of those things that emerged for you as you listen to the 3 presentations. And then through the magic of Zoom, so in about 5 minutes time total, through the magic of Zoom, Gail is going to put everybody into small groups. I think 3 or 4 people, if I remember rightfully, Gail. And what we'd like you to do in those groups is, number 1, check in. One of the things that's kind of a rule of the check-in is that each person has a chance to talk. So go around in a virtual circle. And as listeners, you're just giving yourself over to being listeners. You don't need to respond or anything. Just listen to whatever the person wants to share in their check-in, and then just thank them for sharing. So do a brief check-in, everybody in the group, and then share some of the reflections that you had in your time of journaling and reflection, and just sort of have a generative conversation about some of the stuff that's emerging for you in dialogue. Then we'll come back together. Gail will give you a 2 or 3 minute warning, and we'll come back together into the big group, and we would really appreciate just getting a little bit of a sense of the kinds of themes that were emerging in your discussion.